Well, welcome everyone. This is going to be, we have about a little under an hour for a panel discussion with our guests here. My name is Gregory Mori. I'm the outreach coordinator for the Center for Agroforestry here at the University of Missouri. And I'd like to take a minute to just introduce our guest today on our panel discussion. We have Doug Peterson, who is the Regional Soil Health Specialist for the NRCS for here in Missouri and Iowa. Next, we have Richard Fordyce, who is the Director of the Farm Services Agency here in Missouri, and Colleen Meredith, who is the Director of the Soil and Water Conservation Program for the Missouri Department of Natural Resources, and Stuart Miller, Policy Coordinator for the Missouri Department of Conservation. Again, we have about an hour for a open discussion where we're going to explore have a discussion on how are we doing for promoting soil health here in Missouri, and well, how can we better coordinate? Where can we do more and better leverage the resources we have for having more impact for advancing soil health and promoting adoption of soil health practices? So I'm going to ask the panelists to give a brief introduction of themselves and their agencies and what their agencies are doing specifically, or their role with respect to soil health, and maybe if they have specific programming for soil health, some of those details. And then we'll turn to have some follow-up discussion, explore some of those themes, and then we'll open the floor for questions from the audience. So Doug, could I ask you to begin with a brief introduction? We have microphones in between each of the panelists. Just an introduction of yourself, your agency, and what your role is vis-a-vis soil health.
I sat on this end so I could go last.
Well.
As he said, I'm a regional soil health specialist covering Missouri and Iowa, educating both producers and as well as training NRCS staff, soil district staff, and CCA, certified agronomists, and whoever else will listen, I guess. You know, NRCS has, over the last few years, has made some pretty substantial investments in soil health. You know, the division that I work for, the soil health division, was just created a couple of years ago as soil health gained more prominence. We'd always had kind of had a background in soil health, soil quality, as it used to be called, and then a few years ago they kind of changed that influence a little bit, or the way they were going, and started out with the soil health division a couple years ago. That's when I came on board. There's 16 regional soil health specialists across the country in the same job. So they made a pretty substantial investment in that here in the state. Excuse me. Here in the state, J.R. Flores, the state conservationist, has made a substantial investment in training state staff, NRCS staff here in Missouri. This year we just kind of finalized some dates, or we're working on finalizing some dates for another round of training for all of the staff across the state to help understand soil health better, because it's as most of you know, of all the things in agriculture, soil health is changing as rapidly. Our understanding of soil health is changing as rapidly as just about anything, and so that education and that training has to be an ongoing effort to continue to do that. From a program standpoint, you know, the EQIP program, the federal EQIP cost share program, they have continued to fund a tremendous amount of practices that are soil health based practices, soil conservation practices that are based on soil health management systems, and that continues to be a strong focus, both here in Missouri as well as across the nation. So,
thank you, Doug. Please, Richard. Sure. Richard, yeah. Well, we'll just continue with introductions and then follow up with some questions for you. Yeah. Go ahead, please, Richard.
Good afternoon, everyone. Again, my name is Richard Fordyce. I'm the State Executive Director of the Missouri Farm Service Agency. I've been in this role now a whole 7 weeks. But FSA can play I think, a very meaningful role in promoting and moving soil health forward. Prior to this opportunity, I was the director of the Missouri Department of Agriculture for about 3.5 years. And prior to that, I was the chairman of the State Soil and Water Commission, worked alongside Colleen, administering the dedicated sales tax for improving, reducing soil erosion and improving water quality. So, and then I guess prior to that and simultaneous to all of that, I've been a farmer in Northwest Missouri. Conservation has been something that's been very important to us on our farm. I have to be careful what I say because I have a neighbor that lives directly across the road from land that we farm who is sitting to my left. So I'm going to be very careful in what I say. But I think that certainly, and Doug is exactly right. We talk about all this innovation in agriculture that's taking place, whether it's the innovation on our tractors. And I was going to make one comment to Rob's photo of planting green. Because I've done that, when you plant, so the photo he had of the tractor planting through that cereal rye, did you notice that yellow globe on top of the cab? That yellow globe on top of the cab is his GPS guidance. And you have to have that if you're going to plant in 4-foot tall rye because you cannot find your marker track to find your way back. Anyway, I guess that's a farmer joke. But it is really something that is probably advancing as quickly as some of that other innovation. And again, to Doug's point, and maybe expand on that just a little bit from a farmer's perspective, is that when we started to see these advances in technology, there were some folks that were way ahead of others, and most of us were trying to catch up and learning and trying to go to anything we could, talk to our equipment suppliers and all that to try to understand how we could maximize this new technology. I think this concept, and I was going to say new concept, but super old concept, maybe just newly adopted concept of soil health and cover crops and all of those things that fall into that conversation, I think are in exactly that same vein. There's still so much more to know about it, so much more to learn about it, and understanding how it works best in your operation. But from the Farm Service Agency standpoint, I'm confident that, for example, and I know we're going to talk about this just a little bit later on, Gregory, but we are the only agency in the state that farmers probably have direct contact with over the counter, that every farmer or almost every farmer in the state has interaction with. So I think we could play a really key role in directing them to resources that can be beneficial, helping them maybe understand what's available when it comes to soil health, cover crops, and those kind of things. So is that good enough?
Yeah, that's good, Richard.
All right.
Yeah, we're going to follow up on that point.
All right.
Thank you. So, Colleen, please.
Hi, I work for the Missouri Department of Natural Resources. I'm the Soil and Water Program Director. Our program is extremely fortunate because, as Director Pauly spoke to you earlier today, we have the Park Soils and Water Sales Tax that supports our program. And 50% of the revenue from that tax goes to soil and water conservation and 50% to state parks. And I see Dr. Susan Flotter in the audience. She's a champion for state parks for years and years. And so this tax, it was developed over 30 years ago, and it was really a brainchild of some very clever people because it's got huge support around the state, and in 2016 it passed by 80% of the voters. So we are very fortunate to have that money in Missouri. We're really the leading state in the nation. There's a few other states that have a tax like that, but they're split amongst many more people. So we have a lot of funds that we can do good conservation with. Our program works so that there's 114 soil and water conservation districts, one in every county. And Debbie Corse, who is on your panel this morning, is on the board of the Mississippi Soil and Water Conservation District. And they're made of 4 elected board members, and then the other person on the board is the University of Missouri Extension. So we have a very good tie-in with the university there. So through this work, we can reach private landowners. A lot of our soil and water boards are located in USDA offices, and the program is also guided by a commission. Richard was the chair of the commission for 8 years, And our commission is very unique. The 6 voting members are all farmers, so they have a real stake in farming. They know what they're talking about with farming. And then our ex officio guidance members are the Department of Natural Resources, Department of Agriculture, Department of Conservation, and University of Missouri. So we have a built-in partnership, really, which is very, very good. I think in the last, say since 2012, we've done maybe 3 things that I think have really supported soil health and cover crops. One is to actually develop a soil health cover crop practice through our program. Another one is to develop a very special relationship with the Soil Health Assessment Center. Russ and Dawn up there, I see them. We talk all the time. It's very tied in with our cost share. And then the other thing is we do a lot of leveraging for other agencies and groups to provide funding so we can get match for competitive grants around the state. So I think those are the big things that we do. We can maybe elaborate on those later, but you know, thank you for voting for the tax. And if any of you ever want to be on your soil and water board, they're always looking for people in the counties to serve.
Thank you, Colleen. Yeah.
I'm really fortunate. I started my career with the old Soil Conservation Service as a soil scientist. So I began my time there. I worked for the Department of Natural Resources in reclaiming abandoned mine lands, which is all about building soils from the very worst possible situation and then how that's connected to water and water quality. And then I started working for the Department of Conservation. So I've worked for the 3 significant land resource agencies of the state of Missouri and feel very fortunate to do that. The other thing I'm really lucky is that our director basically said everything I needed to say, so I don't need to say anything more this afternoon. But you saw the passion, and Colleen knows this very, very well because she was former director of DNR. You saw the passion. You also heard the importance she applies soil health and healthy waters, as she said, healthy lands, healthy waters, to everything that we're going to be doing in the future as part of that strategic planning process. So to be real quick and brief about it, what we're going to be doing is being engaged with all of you in this room to work on those fundamental questions of soil and water conservation as it relates to a growing demand on our natural resources. You know, we want to take the long view of this. We want to make sure that we are planning for future generations. That's part of our mission. That's part of our constitutional direction that we have in the state of Missouri, that the Department of Conservation is responsible for that sort of planning. So,
Great. Thank you, Stuart. Oops. Colleen, I'd like to follow up a question to you on some of the things you mentioned, and specifically, you mentioned that the DNR is very much focused with its programs. You have a dedicated tax that helps fund some of these things. You have specific programs to promote soil health. You have cost shares and incentives. But you mentioned your efforts to leverage, to partner with other agencies and really leverage a range of resources. Can you talk more about that specifically? What are some of the opportunities to better leverage the other resources and for a greater impact?
Sure. There are a lot of grants through USDA that often come out and that are very competitive for states. And one is called the Regional Conservation Partnership Program. And what that does is that's actually EQIP funds through NRCS, but they have to have at least a 50% match of state or local funds. So our program can often match, say, cost share dollars or technical help that the Soil and Water District staff do to make those very competitive. So the Department of Agriculture received a cover crop grant, and we provided probably like $150,000 of leverage each year for 5 years for that grant, and which made it competitive. There was a conservation innovation grant that there's a Sheridan County Soil and Water District has a demonstration cover crop farm, and there was a conservation innovation grant that Dr. Udawada was competitive for, and we helped to provide match for Dr. Udawada so that, you know, I'm not saying our match helps them get that, but monetarily it does, because you have to have a certain amount of match. So we do a lot of matching projects like that, and we can do it through help with Soil and Water District staff time and also with our cost share dollars. So that's one way we can do that.
You know, I've heard today emphasized many times that here in Missouri we have some special resources, and perhaps more than any other state, especially the Soil Health Assessment Center, the SHAC, and our dedicated tax that funds some of the conservation and programs of DNR and NDC. But how well are we doing really using those and for best impact? What more can we be doing? What's missing? Is there more opportunities? Where can we explore more opportunities for better coordination among agencies for advancing soil health?
Well, I think we've done a really, really good job of coordination with the Soil Health Assessment Center. The Department of Natural Resources provided $500,000 to help that center. I know the Natural Resources Conservation Service provided a lot of funds too. But more importantly, our cover crop practice, it's required in our cover crop practice that a soil health test is taken, a bulk density test, and sent into the lab for that cost share practice, so they know what their baseline is. And through that, there's been a lot of funds that have, through that, there, just for example, in the first year there was about 1,300 contracts, the second year 1,700, and this year there's about 2,500 contracts. So all those soil samples go into SHAC and they get tested, so there's actually a baseline. Missouri probably has more soil health data than a lot of, but there are, you know, some of the things that we can do. I think one of the hardest things that is the translation of some of that data, and I know Dr. VM spoke about that some, the translation of some of that data to farmers. There's a lot of data right now, but it's been coming, it was very fast in coming, and just also soil and water staff learning about the practice, how to do the soil tests, how farmers do it. So there's been a lot of challenges, but I think, you know, especially with SHAC, we've had it's very unique in the country, and I think it's been a super good partnership.
Let me turn to Doug. Doug, maybe I'm going to put a similar question to you. I guess I'd like to probe a bit more with you. How well do you think we're doing here in Missouri as the regional soil health specialist? How well are we doing here in Missouri to advance soil health? And
that sounds like a loaded question.
yes, it is.
Well, you know, I mean, you look at the numbers of practices that we've installed either with EQIP or state cost share funding, and there's a lot of them that have been installed. I think the real issue comes in when you realize just how many acres of cropland there is, you know, and how many dollars. I mean, here in Missouri, there's no doubt we're very fortunate, you know, to have a great, would you say, $40 million, and EQIP, you know, $25 million in EQIP. So just to give you some perspective, there's about a little over 10 million acres of cropland in Missouri, something like that. So if you took that $65 million of cost share, EQIP and district cost share, state cost share, and you applied that with one of the cheapest practices that we can do is cover crop and no-till, Rob, right? So even if we only paid $30 an acre, we took that $65 million, we took every single dollar of it and put it on to pay $30 an acre on cover crops in the state of Missouri. It would still take us over 5 years to pay for every single acre of cropland in Missouri just once. And then you go to states like Iowa, where I work as well, that don't have as big a state cost share program and have twice as many acres. And the same scenario up there with their state dollars and federal dollars would take 17 years to pay for cover crops on every acre of Iowa cropland once. You know, because the thing I always get that question is, you know, well, we've got to come up with more cost share dollars. Well, look at the Chesapeake Bay. You know, they say that's a great example. Chesapeake Bay, almost 100% coverage in cover crops. Not quite, but pretty close. But when you look at the acres involved and the population base around it that they have to pay for that, it's a huge population base to stick a whole bunch of money into a pretty small watershed compared to the states of Missouri and Iowa, with not near as big a population base and a huge number of acres. So, so I look at it, and while I say that there's no doubt we need to be very efficient and use those cost share dollars to the best of our ability, we also have to understand that to treat all of the issues we have in Missouri and Iowa, it's going to have to be done with just landowners realizing, hey, this is the economics dictate that I do this to my land. You know, I think there was several people. Rob mentioned it. Nick mentioned it earlier. You know, 20% yield increase by increasing aggregate stability, whatever the level was he had on there. And so I think that's where we have to come. Where the real question is not, you know, are we making the most out of those dollars we have, but what are we doing outside of that realm?
Doug, where do you think some of the key barriers or gaps are? Is it in the research side? Do we need more research? Is it in education and information sharing? Or is it maybe on some of the, are the economics there for adoption? Or is it maybe some policy questions and disincentives that are the key barriers for farmers adopting?
You know, I don't think that. I think there needs to be a continual education process. We know that a lot of producers still don't totally understand, you know, a whole entire soil health management system, because it's fairly new, right? So I think that's got to be a continuing education has got to be part of the process. And then I think a big part of the message is that we need to express to producers that, because of the research that Rob has, because of the stuff that Nick has, and many others, you know, work with a producer in Iowa, Wayne Fredericks, that's a member of the Soybean Association up there. He puts all of his cost data into a program that compares apples to apples. It's in a large group of producers. It's a business management group, and it shows that he's 100% no-till, long-term no-till. It shows that he has a $65 per acre advantage, a reduced cost for equipment, and a $30 an acre cost advantage for labor. So that's a $90 an acre advantage versus the tillage farmers in that same management group. And so I think as we begin to talk to people, we need to make sure that they understand, and we need to teach it even as an agency. We need to teach these soil health management systems as an agronomic and economic management strategy, not as a conservation strategy or an environmental benefit strategy. They're a great environmental benefit, but we need to teach them as a cost benefit, as a way for farmers to make money. And I think without a doubt they are, if they're managed correctly.
So a focus on the farmer and a focus on the economics. We've heard from
it's all risk and reward.
Yeah.
You bet.
But I think from what you're saying and earlier, some of the data in earlier presentations, I think you feel that the economic information is there. We have enough data showing that there's an economic benefit. It's really the translation of that or the communication to the farmer or removing some of the barriers or disincentives that, or maybe policy questions, maybe like crop insurance, that it might present some disincentive to actually implement some of these soil health practices.
Right. I mean, there's no doubt. Rob presented it and said that. What was the figures, Rob? How many of them thought that cover crops reduced drought resistant or increased drought resistance? 2/3. So if we know that the ones that are using it feel that it's a great risk management strategy, you know, what's inhibiting other producers from adopting that?
Let's explore that a bit. I guess one question, and I'm going to put this to all the panel members, how can we better develop farmer-to-farmer communication and education about soil health and cover crops, and how can we promote better networking among farmers to promote these practices? And if anyone wants to have a stab at that.
Who do you listen to?
I'll take a stab, I guess. I think peer-to-peer is certainly a good method for disseminating information. I know already this year, we call as farmers this time of the year is meeting season, and so there's been a lot of meetings. You have planting season, harvest season, meeting season, and I know any meeting that has soil health or has cover crops or something associated with the title, the room is usually full of folks. And so but one of the things that I think is a challenge, though, and so we've been incorporating cover crops in some form or fashion. This is the 5th year to do that, and some years we have more success than we have others. It's farming. And so some years the cover crop establishment in the fall is super successful. Some years it's not. Some years planting into a cover crop is a lot less troublesome than it is other years. So since this is not something that we've been doing for generations, there's still a lot to learn. We also have situations in Missouri. Missouri is an incredibly diverse state. If you go from northwest Missouri to southeast Missouri, you see all different kinds of agriculture. You see different kinds of soil. Certainly a different kind of climate. And so the recommendations, I think that's one of the things that's actually lacking at this point. Is what are species recommendations, what are planting recommendations, termination recommendations as it relates to where you are specifically in the state. And I know when seed companies come to me to sell me seed for corn or soybeans, they all come with different pitches and different advantages and different things based on yield maps that I've recorded, based on fertility history, based on all kinds of things. We don't have that yet, or maybe we do, Doug. I don't know, but we don't have that in a really digestible fashion for producers to take that as recommendations. But I do believe certainly industry has a role to play. I think certainly university has a role to play. Federal agencies have a role to play. State agencies have a role to play. I think it's all of us together, because I can tell you that there is certainly an appetite. There is an appetite by producers to adopt this, to adopt these practices. And according to Rob's data and Rob's report earlier, people are doing it for a lot of different reasons, and all of those reasons are good, right? So I think that we all should have a little skin in the game, and we all need to continue to have this conversation and continue to learn together.
Thank you, Richard. Maybe follow up on one aspect there. There seems to be an opportunity. It's resonating. We're getting farmer interest. There's a lot of turnout to meetings. As some of the speakers today mentioned, that soil health, despite our different approaches in agriculture, soil health is really something that's kind of a common theme, or something that really brings us together. You mentioned the private sector, Richard. How can we better engage the private sector, or bring private sector entities to the table in soil health movement or soil health consortium? Can you comment on that?
Well, I think certainly, and Doug, I hate to keep following up on what Doug said, but he makes really good points, and that is, certainly it's, we want to do it from the environmental benefit. We want to do it from all this, whatever it is, but at the end of the day, we talk about sustainability all the time, and I've been on the soybean, I'm not anymore, but on the soybean checkoff boards at the state or the national level for the last 25 years. And we actually kind of got into this conversation about sustainability probably before a lot of other commodities, or even a lot of folks did. We were doing this 15 years ago, and the definition of sustainability depends on what you want, right? So there are probably 2 or 3 or 10 dozen definitions of sustainability. And it's all kind of driven by the consumer or the customer, or what is sustainability? What are the values of that to me? Well, to me, the definition of sustainability is profitability. I can do all kinds of things on my farm, but if I am no longer there based on economics, then my sustainable run as a farmer is gone. It's ended. It's over. And so So I think the private sector has, I mean, they have a lot of skin in the game on this thing because, you know, you have seed providers, you have fertility providers, you have advisors, you have technology providers that all have the ability to benefit from this and help move this whole effort forward. You know. It has been amazing. It's been amazing to farm the last 30 years. And the first time I planted corn, and you're not going to believe this, but the first time I planted corn, I was 8 years old. And it was on a 30-20 John Deere and a 6-row planter. And my dad, I rode with him on the fender, and I rode back and forth. And one day, at the end of one row, he got off, and he said, "You ready?" And I said, "I've never planted corn before." And he said, "Well, haven't you been watching?" And I said, "Well, sure I have." He said, "Well, get in the seat," and he said, "You follow the mark way ahead of the hood and not right in front of the hood, and that's how you keep your rows straight." That's when I first started planting corn. I now plant corn. I never touch the steering wheel. I don't touch anything. It's all variable rate. It's precision. It puts product where it needs to be. And so to watch that evolution and that innovation in agriculture has been absolutely amazing. And I think we are on the frontier of seeing the next really amazing thing, and it is that discovery and that understanding of what soil health is, and how do we maximize that? Because I can tell you as a farmer, number one, I want to be sustainable. I want to be sustainable economically, and I want to be sustainable environmentally. I want to pass it on to my kids, who hopefully pass it on to their kids. I also want to make money while I'm doing that, and so this is absolutely why the private sector needs to be engaged and involved in this conversation.
Please, Doug, go ahead.
Excuse me, good comments. I'll come at it from industry, from the other side, from the consumer side of it. There's a large co-op in Iowa that sources the soybeans for Hellmann's mayonnaise, and excuse me. And they have come to realize what it's doing for the quality of the beans. So they are actually offering an incentive for the contract growers for their soybeans, $10 an acre to plant cover crops and harvest the soybeans from those acres where they're planting cover crops. Yeah. So I think as these large corporations that are sourcing these, whether it be soybeans or any other food source, as they come to understand what soil health is going to mean to the quality of their food products, those consumers and the corporations that are supplying those consumers, they're going to begin to offer these incentives to farmers. And I think that's going to be the real driver. Because again, it comes back to, what'd you say? Economics, right? And it's all based on that. And I think that's where in a true free market economy, you know, and agriculture is not really a true free market economy. In a true free market economy, I think soil health would get adopted very, very quickly.
Because you mentioned the Hellmann's example, there's the SUSTAIN program in parts of the Midwest. There's corporations like Unilever and others, and Kellogg's, that are in fact paying a premium, and just as you mentioned, for suppliers, producers who implement soil health practices. How do we engage, how does that present an opportunity for some of our agency programs to, is there opportunities to stack or couple or bundle or somehow coordinate, and so there's a greater leverage? Could you explore that?
I mean, I think, again, that's where I said that a while ago, we still need to use the programs that we have, whether it be state cost share or EQIP. We still need to use those and maximize the efficiency of those and what they do. I think we can stack, if we can get producers, you know, to get an EQIP cost share as well as the payment from whoever.
Richard,
I don't think there's any
did you have something to follow up on that?
Yeah, a couple of things. So in Missouri, the Missouri Department of Agriculture has a program that was started a few years ago called the Agriculture Stewardship Assurance Program. And basically it does three things. Number one, it champions the good things that Missouri farmers and ranchers are doing on their farms and ranches. Number two, it offers an opportunity to create topics of conversation that help tell the good story of agriculture. Number three, it allows the producers that are certified as ASAP producers to use that as a marketing advantage. And so when I was the director, we had a number of producers that were certified as ASAP producers and used that in marketing in whatever way worked for them. We had soybean producers that were marketing overseas and used it. We had dairies that had creameries that were using it, and so certainly there is value, and Doug is exactly right on the Hellman's situation, and that's a large scale operation. But there are hundreds of smaller scale operations where the consumer certainly finds value in the production practices of whatever commodity comes off the farm. At the Farm Service Agency, we have a program called Bridges, and it's kind of in its infancy, but the idea behind that is that the Farm Service Agency, again, I mentioned it earlier, almost every farmer in the county comes into the Farm Service Agency, and it's directly across the counter from our folks that work at that county level. The hope is, once the Bridges program is up and running, is that the Farm Service Agency will be a clearinghouse for information, not only Farm Service Agency information, or helping promote NRCS programs or Soil and Water District programs, but other things that are happening in that community or in the state in which they're in. And so I'm really anxious to see where this goes, because this could literally be a really valuable tool to help connect producers with other opportunities. They've even used examples of, we would then promote the soil health meeting that's going on in the community. Our people that are working at FSA would know all about that event and be able to talk to producers about it and steer them in the right direction.
Thank you, Richard. Just one more follow-up, Richard. With you. Yesterday we had a meeting, a soil health summit, and some directors of some agencies, and Director Chin commented that, when asked how could the Missouri Department of Agriculture be involved, that perhaps the Missouri Department of Agriculture didn't have specific financial resources for soil health programs like the DNR or MDC does, but had quite a bit to bring to the table in terms of outreach, education, or otherwise engaging with a range of stakeholders in the agricultural sector to promote and advance health. So I just asked you, maybe pointedly, Richard, what can the FSA bring to the table? What could be a potential FSA's role in soil health?
Well, I think I would be remiss if I didn't mention one of the larger programs that the Farm Service Agency administers across the country, and more specifically here in Missouri, and that's the Conservation Reserve Program. Right. For over 30 years, we've had acres enrolled in the Conservation Reserve Program, or CRP. Don't get it confused with CPR. And certainly that has been, that's been really a foundational growth in soil health. The acres the land that those acres have been enrolled in, at least, especially the last 30 years, certainly have. And I'm no soil scientist, so I'm not going to get out over my skis.
I'm going to guess it's good for soil health
in this room, but it has to have a more positive effect on soil health. When we talk about land that is in the CRP, almost 1 million acres in Missouri, over 70,000 acres of those are highly erodible acres that are being secured and stabilized at this point, and so that's good. Again, and I mentioned it a couple of times, when you think about a location in a county that producers go to, and they go to NRCS, and they go to the Soil and Water District, and they go where it's available. They go to the Conservation Department to get information. But we have producers that are compelled to make a crop report, that are required to do that for a number of reasons: to participate in federal farm programs, to qualify for their crop insurance that they're paying a premium for. And so I think that as we continue to kind of vet this out and figure out how we do this, again, through the Bridges program and promoting soil health and activities and information around that, directing producers to the right place where this information is, we also are looking at recording and during this crop reporting period, producers reporting their cover crops. And so there's clear language. It's allowable now. We're just not doing a great job of capturing all those acres. And at the symposium yesterday, I had some numbers. And so Soil and Water Conservation District cost shared on 117,000 acres in 2017. NRCS EQIP program, 95,000 acres. For a total of 212,000 acres that we know were cost shared on, we only recorded 81,000. That's 130,000 short of just the cost share acres. And NASS in 2012, NASS said there were 400,000 acres of cover crops.
So a lot of farmers are doing these practices.
So they're doing them. You know, Rob, what do we think? About 700,000 acres, maybe? About 700,000 acres of cover crops, and we reported to our offices 81,000 acres. So we're gonna redouble our efforts to start getting more producers to report that. Again, so if there's a farmer in the room, there's clear language about reporting it as a cover only. You know, we've got to be very careful that when we have producers come in and report acres, we have to kind of fill in the puzzle, like all of the plots of land, and they all have to have something in them. So if you report as a cover, that is reported as a cover, not as a cash reportable crop. So we're going to be very careful not to like double count your acres. We're able to do that. We're just not doing that at the level we need to do it, but we're gonna make a lot better effort to get that done moving forward.
Thank you, Richard. Colleen, when we hear Richard comment on just how much engagement the FSA has, essentially every farmer in the state in some way through either crop report or crop insurance, how does that present opportunities? How do we better coordinate or leverage? Do you see any opportunities or how the DNR can advance its soil health objectives in partnering or coordinating with agencies like FSA?
Sure. I think we are all incredible friends. I mean, honestly, and I think what happens is we talk to each other constantly and we say, hey, we're doing this, we're doing this. So what happens in the USDA offices, the soil and water districts are in those offices. Also, MDC has private land conservationists in those offices. So for instance, for our cost share program, there's been a couple things that have been coordinated sort of unofficially. One is that the Department of Conservation, our program pays $30 for a 1 to 2 species cover crop, $30 an acre, or $40 for 3 or more species. Well, the Department of Conservation wants more diversity, so they've put an extra $10 or $15 an acre on top of ours if the landowner uses those species. So that's sort of informal. Another thing that through the Department of Agriculture, they have a bridge loan program. And what that is if there's landowners that can't afford to do the cost share practices up front, they have a loan. And so when we know they have a loan, they can go ahead and do that practice, and then once the landowner gets paid through us, the Department of Ag gets that money to cover the loan. And so there's a lot of conservation practices that have been able to be done through those combinations of efforts. And also through the Regional Conservation Partnership Program, which MDC has received a lot of those, there's a lot of different partners on those. What we can do is we kind of combine, there's some also private groups, corn and soybean have done some monitoring for some of those. So it's honestly not totally planned initially, but we say, hey, we're doing this. And then I think all the groups go, well, I can help you with that, and I can help you with that. And Missouri, I think, is completely unique that way, because I go to all my counterparts' national meetings, and they can't believe, honestly, the partnerships. And also there's a lot of private partnerships too in Missouri with the departments, and so we're just incredibly lucky.
Thank you, Colleen. I'd like to turn the direction a little bit and follow up with Stuart and ask Stuart to comment on, well, how do we better engage and bring into the soil health discussion non-agricultural lands? MDC works with a whole range of landowners and managers on conservation, advancing conservation. How do we bring the soil health discussion to those kind of landowners, non-agricultural, and where are there opportunities to promote soil health in other types of contexts, including, we heard from Director Polly today, the interest of the MDC in working in the urban environments. Please.
I think the very first thing that we need to ask ourselves, and this is me as a soil scientist, I apologize for being techie on that side.
We'll allow that, go ahead.
We have to realize and fully understand, and we have to explain to all people, not just agriculturalists, but people in the cities, people in the suburbs, people who own recreational land. Soil is a biological system. It is based on all the things that you've heard our presenters talk about, these important organisms that are driving a lot of this, processes, all the things that we see beneficial with the soil health movement. Kristen's presentation is a good example of that. We know so little about how to measure some of these and take those measurements and apply them in the field as to what they mean. We're just now beginning that process. And so one of the things I would love to see is, some of the presentations we've seen, what are they going to be like 20 years from now when we start to really understand what this data truly means and how we apply it in the field so that it's really maximizing benefits, maximizing the economic benefits, maximizing the land health, healthy waters concept that Director Polly talked about. So that's the first thing. The other thing, and it goes back to what we've said over here several times, and that is, it's just not simply the producer, but it's the people who buy from the producer. And so how do we reach out as partners? How do we reach out not just simply to people in rural Missouri, not just people who are actual producers on the farm, but all the people who consume? And I think that's one of the most critical things that we can do that Director Polly was mentioning. How do we reach out to the consumer? How do we say and explain as a collective? Because we're stronger together than if we're separate in our messages. How do we explain to them? Soil health is good, not only for the landscape, not only for the waters, but it's good for you because it's good for your health. So we've got to have a unified message. I think that's one of the first things. And that's one of the things I think the Department of Conservation can do, is because we do have the benefit of some communication organs like the conservation itself, but also some of the other ways where we can communicate some of these ideas. But it has to be together as a partnership. So I think that's one of the most important things that we should do as a collective, and that's why she kept mentioning partnerships as being critical to this process. So, two things. We've got to understand the science as best we can, translate that into management, and that's not just for crop production, but that's for management of agroforestry, pecan growers, walnut growers, you name it. We got to figure that out and make that applicable to them as well, because we do have a lot of landowners that are on some of the lands that don't produce a lot of corn and soybeans. And so how do we help them get a better grip financially on what they're trying to do, but yet at the same time, we help them understand the ecological benefits of soil health for themselves, for their future generations, and for people downstream as well.
Thank you, Stuart. So you've mentioned advancing the science and the indicators, but a real need for engaging the more widely the public and public education, and their part of the soil health discussion as well, and from the health benefits that come from that. Could you talk a bit more about engaging other types of landowners? We've talked today in the symposium quite a bit about row cropping and those kind of agriculture operations, but you mentioned a few other types of agricultural practices. Could you talk about non-agricultural lands? And then I think maybe I'd like to follow up on that. You mentioned agroforestry as an approach that needs to be part of the soil health practices.
Well, the numbers are variable, but basically a third of the state is forested, a third of the state is more or less in row crops or fairly intensive agriculture, a third of the state's in grasslands of a variety of sorts. So, you kind of have a unique 3 by 3 by 3 split, if you will. But a lot of that ground, particularly in some of the Ozark parts of the state, people are managing it for a variety of goods, but a lot of that land is just being held for recreational or trying to get a little bit of return on the ground, but a lot of it is focused on more passive management. And so that's one of the things that is really critical, and Colleen especially has remarked on how we will value add some money to some programs to help, focus more on wildlife, let's say for a cover crop or a permanent crop mix. So those are the sorts of things that we can deal there. We've got a whole system with NRCS of helping with the Farm Bill for forestry, just plain simple forest management. We had several people talk about some of the things that they're doing with their farms, getting some management on there. We deal a lot with prairie systems, because we're focused on prairie species that are declining significantly or have declined significantly, and we're trying to manage those the best we can. So we have a management for those sorts of systems. You saw several of the exhibitors focusing on some of these questions of how we protect these natural areas and how we encourage landowners that have more or less natural areas on their properties to manage them as such. So that's one of the things we do. But tying it back to soil health again, and this is something I've worked a little bit with people at Shack and Kristen and some of the others. Those areas, those prairies, those wetlands, those forests, they're the baseline of everything we do in soil health as far as making measurements and figuring out what does the biological system in that soil in a prairie, how does that reflect what's right across the fence, like that one slide that Director Polly showed, literally right across the fence where it's been farmed for 100 years versus the native prairie. That's our baseline. That gives us that information that we can say, okay, this prairie does this from a biological point of view. This cropland does this. How can we implement soil health programs to make that crop field function a little bit more like that prairie over time? I think that's one of the benefits that we can do. So when we go out and we talk to landowners, we can see that connection light up in their faces at times when we talk to them. And then we throw in the aesthetic side, the birds, the butterflies. Monarchs have just exploded in popularity, obviously. So those are the sorts of things that we can do specifically with the Department of Conservation with our partners. And then last, this whole urban, the Green City St. Louis concept. I can't think of the one in Kansas City right now. It slipped my mind. We've got people really thirsting for knowledge about the outside, about nature, about the outdoors. And I'm for one who have grown up with rural background, actually to be completely disclosed completely, those 2 tubs of soil, that was on my mom and dad's farm. But we've got to make those connections with people. It's not a rural, suburban, urban divide, because the truth is, and I'm no politician, but I recognize we have to be where the people are. So we've got to be able to make connections between people in rural Missouri with people in urban Missouri, because ultimately people in urban, suburban Missouri are going to have influence on what we do. And I think that's one of the reasons why we're changing our strategic vision, is the realization we've got to figure out what people really want from us. And so the soil health movement is perfect for that, because intuitively we know it's good. We know it's beneficial. We need to understand the science a little bit better. But it helps rural communities, it helps the state of Missouri, the Midwest, you name it. So those are the connections we've got to make, and we've got to look at it from the sense of building constituencies, building new relationships.
Soil health, it seems to be something that we can all agree on and be passionate about, and as was mentioned in some of the discussions today, something that brings us together. And you mentioned a range of types of landowners and land uses, and one maybe quick question I'd put out to the panel: how about the livestock sector? What more can we do to engage with grazers, ranchers for advancing soil health? And the second question, what more can we do to, we saw some examples of the benefits of livestock rotations, or bringing livestock into our common cropping systems. How can we better promote some of those practices? Sure.
Well, for our cover crop practice that we have, in the practice, they're allowed to do grazing for livestock. Mm-hmm. They're not supposed to graze it way down so that it doesn't contain some cover still. The first years we tried it, this cover crop developed over a few years. In the first year there was no grazing, and that shows you that there's been a lot of research and things that say grazing is a very good component of it, so that they can do that. But we have a lot of interest from, we hear from the districts that there are landowners who want to plant sort of cover crops into pastures, and they want to, you know, they're seeing that their additional types of diversity can improve, and it's not really probably what we call a cover crop, but there's a huge interest in that. I know there's a lot of talk at you know, a lot of the conferences about grazing cover crops. So one thing I think that I've heard mostly, and I don't know the answer to this, but people are a little concerned about some of the herbicides and things that may have been used, and if livestock are grazing, you know, if that's used off label or if something else happens, that's a huge concern. We hear that question all the time, so I think that's where the university could really come in and help. But from what we hear, that's probably the biggest concern. I think everyone thinks grazing for livestock is tremendous for cover crops, but they're a little concerned about what's been used on the crop. Is that being transferred to the livestock?
Thank you, Colleen. Did you have a comment, Doug?
Sure.
Yeah, thanks.
I just want to say one thing.
Okay.
I promise I'll be brief.
Thank you.
So Missouri is number 2 in cow-calf production in the country, second behind only Texas. So the grazing component of cover crops is really important.
So I think there's kind of maybe two parts, I guess, I'll address on his. One is soil health in perennial pasture systems, and then or livestock in perennial pasture systems, and then livestock on grazing cover crops in a cropland situation. That's kind of two different things. I think anybody that saw the rainfall demonstration out there today, you know how much runoff occurred off of the continuously grazed pasture versus the well-managed pasture. I think that's a huge indication of you know, some of the issues that we have in the state are continuous. We still have, even with 30 years now almost of grazing schools and cost share, we've still got way too many acres of continuously grazed pasture in Missouri that still have way too much runoff. Honestly, too many lost dollars, too many grazing days that aren't achieved because we gave up too much water. So I think we have to continue to do that. That rainfall simulator has been one of the best tools we have been incorporating into the grazing schools that I've been a part of, because men are pretty visual learners, right? And if you can show them, you can tell them something 100 times, but if you show it to them, they're gonna get it a lot better. So we need to continue to do that and continue to emphasize that improving management on our perennial pastures is the best way to add more profit to those livestock operations, get more grazing days out of those acres. And then the second part of it is the huge opportunity to graze cover crops on crop fields. You know, I think there's a huge opportunity coming for custom grazers to start, because a lot of the row crop guys, there's a few that still have livestock and row crop, but a lot of row crop guys don't have any livestock anymore and don't necessarily have any desire to add that back to their operation. They might let somebody graze some fields, but they probably don't want to do it. So you look in the southern plains, you know, Oklahoma and Texas. There's a huge number of acres down there that's wheat that some acres they might graze and then pull off of it, depending on the moisture that happens that year, pull off of it and let that come up and go ahead and harvest it for a grain crop. They also might go ahead and graze it out. And I think there's going to be a lot of opportunities for livestock owners to do some custom grazing like that on acres owned by somebody else. I mean, it's already happening. We know that right now. So I think there's going to be a tremendous opportunity for producers to do that for cow-calf, for stockers. It is some tremendous quality forage. There'll be some logistical things to figure out and to deal with.
So that presents an opportunity.
Sure. And I think that's a real opportunity that's going to be coming here in the future.
Thank you, Doug. So we're just about out of time. I'd like to conclude the session with just one last question, and returning to this, the core issue of how can we better coordinate amongst our different agencies and actors involved in promoting soil health. What's the right approach? Do we need a more formalized and defined coordinating body? Is that maybe the form of reactivating or formalizing the Missouri Soil Health Consortium? Do we need other approaches, say regional soil health committees? What are some things that are going to make a real impact in improving the coordination and impact of our different agencies, programs, and actions? Does anyone care to have a go at that? Maybe Colleen? All right. And then we'll wrap things up. Yeah.
I think the Soil Health Consortium idea is tremendous, and it has already been informal, more or less. A lot of groups are in that consortium. I think some of the things that could rotate around that consortium is some of the things that we all see is what are the termination dates? You know, there's trouble with termination dates. Some people, you know, don't like the idea. What are the best seeding dates? From the Soil Health Assessment Center results, what can we tell from those? We have a state line baseline now. We have every county has a maximum, minimum, and mean, but what does that mean to the producers doing cover crops? So I think there's a lot of items that a group like that can look at. And the consortium, you know, anyone can be a member of that. And I think that's a good idea to have it somewhat formalized so that as many groups as possible can jump in on that and you know, everyone's singing the same song, I think.
Right.
I think one thing that everyone needs to remember, our budgets are flat and declining. And so if the Soil Health Consortium is an example where other entities are going to have to be out there with the public government agencies. Because the truth is, we're not what we were 50 years ago or 25 years ago. So we're going to have that partnership. It's going to have to be much more important and much more driven by your interests. And we have to respond to your interests, and we have to be prepared to change some of our philosophies to respond to your interests. So that's one of the first steps. The other step is, and Director Pauly again made a very telling point, population's increasing. Demand for resources are going to increase, particularly in places like Missouri. So now's the time to be planning and making these partnerships effective, because no one agency can do it. It takes all of us. It's going to take all of you as well. So now's the time to start planning.
Thank you, Stuart. Stuart, I think you encapsulated it or summarized it quite well there, that no one agency can do it. Partnerships are needed, or a way to have a greater impact. And so increased coordination among the agencies and seeking out partnerships. I think we have some of the key players in the room today and over in our meeting yesterday. So I hope we can see some continued great work from you all. And I just want to thank you for participating in today and your comments. So I think with that, we can bring this session and the symposium to a close. So I want to thank you all for being here with us. I'm sorry we've run out of time and not able to take questions from the audience. We do have now, though, a poster session that is happening up in the atrium, and a reception with some food and beverages for you. So once again, I thank you for being here and participating with us, to all of our great speakers today, and to our panelists. Thank you so much.